When Senator Gazelka introduced the resolution, I heard him say that he doesn't want, and lots of the Republican statements have said the same thing, that they don't want the governor to unilaterally make such major policy decisions. I think I've heard the words in the last 5 minutes. I've heard dictator, I've heard tyrant, I think I've heard emperor. I know Tim Walz, and I don't think he's any of those things. I don't think he wants to be any of those things. I think he doesn't like to be forced into a position where he has to have executive authority like this. But somebody does have to make some major decisions. And I think this resolution is exactly backwards from where we ought to be. The governor is in the midst of thinking over and meeting with people and wrestling with the topics that we all can have input in on things like masks and school openings. But whether he should make them or the legislature should make them, somebody has to make the decisions. And he's making these tough decisions as we go. And as he extends the session, the emergency authority, he calls us back into special session. That's a check and balance. So is Senator Gazelka's resolution. We can cut it off if we think it's unreasonable. We can challenge things. We can overrule decisions. We can do that all legislatively. But he is not trying to do things in an unreasonable way. I think he's methodically and logically and carefully wrestling with what a lot of us would consider no-win choices, like whether you open the schools up, or you have remote learning, or you have a hybrid model, which are the three models they're considering. None of them are really good. Yes, one or two of the speakers said, yeah, the kids under 20 who are dying from this are very few and far between. So what's the problem? What is it, 82%, I think I heard, of the school bus drivers in the state over 55 and therefore at risk? A lot of them a lot older than that. We don't have school bus drivers, kids don't get to school, it doesn't work anyway. They're not easy decisions. And when I said this is backwards, saying the governor shouldn't make that decision on July 27th so the schools have some time to try and implement that decision, and so it can be tweaked and everything else, I'm listening closely, and I have yet to hear a single mention of a legislative or Senate hearing on opening schools. And Senator Nelson, unless you're being prohibited from doing it by leadership, it seems we could have one. And I agree, Senator Benson said this would be wonderful. The public, parents and teachers, they'd benefit from hearing all the arguments and hearing the discussion, something legislative hearings are very good at. So Senator Nelson could easily have hearings to consider the regular school back in-person school, or the remote learning, or the alternative, or if she's got some other ideas, or anybody in the committee has any ideas, they could consider them. That's a great way to do it. But if we haven't talked about having hearings this week, and I hear we're going to adjourn in a week, then we come to the end of July very quickly, on July 27th, and if this would take effect, then the governor can't make any decision. And I keep hearing, I heard the St. Francis superintendent the other day on the radio, I've heard others, they're waiting eagerly to hear what the decision is going to be and how they're going to work around that and how they're going to make it happen. What they're not looking for is to somebody say, well, we don't want the governor to decide, we'll think about it. And yes, several of you said we can come back in September if things get worse and we can make some decisions. So where does that leave the superintendents? Where does it leave the teachers? Somebody has got to decide. And we're saying, oh, let's take away the governor's authority to do that because we know better, and we might someday make those decisions. That's what I have a problem with. If we don't want the governor to decide, where are our hearings? Senator Franzen said she voted for this resolution to cut it off last month. She's been waiting, hasn't seen anything change in the last month. When are we going to decide? Senator Matthews said that he had some bills. I think we did vote on one of them on the floor on opening businesses. And it didn't make it through the House, I understand, and that's part of our legislative process, which means that even if you think that was the way to do it and that the governor's way off base in when he's opening up things and how. But we've heard nothing on any of the other executive orders. We've never heard nothing on masks. We've heard nothing on school opening. We seem to want to blame him for being a tyrant and a dictator. But what are we going to do? Well, we're going to sit here and twiddle our thumbs, and we can't have any hearings because that might be controversial. And I think if you do want to pass something, because I've heard 2 or 3 of the speakers say we got to have the schools fully opened up this fall and in-class learning for everyone. If you think that's a good idea, you're the majority. You can schedule the hearings. I've had a lot of bills I've introduced that don't get hearings. But Senator Gazelka, if he has a bill, I'm sure he could get it heard. I think, Senator Nelson, you would likely hear his bill if he sent one to your committee. And I'd urge you to do that before you have a bill or resolution to cut off the governor's executive order. That's what you should be doing first. Say, we can do this. We have some ideas. We think the governor's wrong here. We think his decision July 27th isn't going to be the right one. We think we got a better idea. We'll put it out there, and I think the public would benefit. We'd all benefit. And I think there are a lot of people in this body who, if they heard all these hearings, might change their mind along the way. Maybe they think they should be more open or more remote or more in between. But those hearings would be valuable. But that's what we ought to be doing here. That's why he calls the special session, so that we have the check and balance. And the check and balance just doesn't mean saying, no, nobody should be making that decision. We can do this resolution. I'd be open to this resolution if I thought we were going to address those urgent issues. I think it's awkward for a 201-member bicameral legislature to come up with a lot of quick decisions in a quickly changing situation, but we have to do things differently. And so if you have things, Senator Nelson, I'm not on your committee, but I'd care to bet that a lot of members of the committee would care to show up and participate in those hearings. Do those first, then come back and say, now we don't need the governor to make those decisions. And on the masks, a study out of Washington State suggested that the likely death toll, I think it's about 130 or 140,000 Americans so far. We're 5% of the world's population. I think we got about a quarter of the deaths. We're not doing that good. They said if 95% of Americans would wear masks between now and November, we would cut 45,000 deaths from the death toll. And I know the early numbers were higher than they should have been. I'd rather people be overly cautious at the beginning until we know more. But now it does look like that 210,000 deaths by November is likely unless we change. And so maybe we need a mask mandate. And maybe the legislature doesn't want that, and maybe they don't want the governor to do it. If so, prohibit that, or allow it, or require it. But don't take away all his power and say somebody's going to take care of it and plan to go home in a week and leave these all undecided. I strongly urge you to put your own house in order before you go and say we're going to take away the governor's authority to make decisions that somebody needs to make.